Good evening. My name is Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo Story. It has been another day of dramatic developments in the Aryan Khan arrest case. Well, today all cameras were at the Arthur jail in Mumbai. Those dramatic pictures that give you a glimpse of what happened today as Shahrukh Khan, the mega star, arrived to meet his son in jail for the first time because the rules which were restricted because of COVID protocols, have finally permitted it. Mr. Khan is said to have met his son for 18 minutes, but they were separated by an intercom and a glass screen. Thereafter, the Narcotics Control Bureau team reached Mannat, the residence of Shahrukh Khan in Mumbai. The NCB clarified that this was not a raid, but that they had come to collect some documents, quote unquote. So you're seeing that media melee everywhere the NCB and Shahrukh Khan went. Later in the day came more drama as actor Ananya Panday, said to be a friend of Aryan Khan. She had her residence raided and she was then summoned to the Narcotics Control Bureau. So the NCB is upping the ante even as Mr. Khan's family appeals to the Bombay High Court. That appeal for bail will be heard next week. On the program today, we ask how to understand this crackdown. Is it a clean up Bollywood or is it a bully Bollywood, as many have alleged? Let's bring up our panel on this program today. Joining us on the program is Nikhil Taneja. He's the co-founder of Yuvaa, a group that does some excellent work among young people. And I'm a great admirer of the work Nikhil does, so it's great to have him for the first time today on the Mojo Story. Welcome, Nikhil. Mrunalini Deshmukh, old friend, well-known lawyer, a woman who pulls no punches, is also with us. Great to see you, Mrunal. Madhavan, old friend of the Mojo Story, veteran journalist, commentator, columnist, is with us. And finally, on the program today, we are joined by Mr. Dipankar Banerjee. He has been an official with the Central Bureau of Narcotics. Can we correct that and add an S right there, with the Central Bureau of Narcotics, and has also been on deputation to the NCB. All right, Mrunalini, let me start with you. What we have is a denial of bail by the special court based on WhatsApp conversations. We do not have possession, we do not have dealing, and we do not have a test that even proves consumption. We only have WhatsApp chats, and we have sections that have been registered against Aryan Khan, making it impossible for him to get bail from the special court. So, do you agree with how the law has responded, or do you find it disproportionate? You're on mute, Pranali. Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
can you hear me? Can you hear
Yes,
me?
yes.
Okay. At the outset, I would like to say that ultimately, I would not like to sort of comment on the judgment because that has come from the wisdom of the court. What is particularly relevant, and I'm talking about the judgment that just came yesterday, was about the paragraph 34 and 35. If you see, and if you permit me to read that, those are the most essential things which talks about, which is the gist of it. What the judge says is, moreover, WhatsApp chats prima facie reveals that the accused, number one, which is Aryan in this case, is dealing in illicit drug activities. Now, that's a very loaded word, but that's what it says. Illicit drug activities of narcotic substances on regular basis. Therefore, it cannot be said that accused number one is not likely to commit similar offense while on bail. And 35 says that the considering the prima facie involvement of applicants 1 to 3 in the commission of grave and serious offense, this is not a fit case for granting bail. So this is what the court has summarized in para 34, and this is Judge Patil of the Sessions Court or the Special Court, saying that these are the reasons why he feels within his powers he cannot grant bail. Now, we have to understand one thing, that whether these WhatsApp messages amount to evidence in a court of law, that will have to be decided at the time of trial. But today, the investigating authorities are laying their hands on every possible avenue that they get, because I think what they are trying to do is, they are not trying, of course they are now, the innocent ones are the accused 1, 2, 3 that we have got, but they are trying to get the larger network and the larger the peddlers and the providers, etc., to be able to
I
cut it.
mean, Yeah, sorry, I'm interrupting you. That's, of course, what the prosecutors have argued in court, that Aryan Khan is a link to
Right,
the peddlers, to the
right,
conspiracy.
right, right.
But I tried to ask a former DG of the NCB, and I'll ask Mr. Banerjee the same question. Why Aryan Khan can't be interrogated, let's say, at home? You can impound his passport, you can say don't fly abroad. Why do you need to keep a 23-year-old on whom you have not even charged him with possession or dealing? You have only these WhatsApp conversations. Why do you need to continue to keep him in jail in a country where the judicial system argues that bail should be the norm, Mrunalini?
Tampering with the evidences that otherwise could be there. Now, if you have, I mean, I'm not even for a moment saying that he should be kept in custody. So don't get me wrong. I'm talking purely as a lawyer. The reason why this custody is required, and I was just talking offline before this show, and I was saying that custodial interrogation, there has to be a time limit to which the accused can be kept for the purposes of taking information. Now, this delay and more, I mean, it's such an unfortunate thing that for the last 5 days prior to Monday, the courts were shut because of Eid and because of other holidays that came up, Saturday, Sunday, and that this boy was really a victim of that. But custodial interrogation should have a time frame, according to me, and the authorities cannot endlessly keep someone just because they are unable to get anything there. Because under Article 21 of the Constitution, your right to life and your right to be, you cannot be imprisoned. Your right to move around freely has to be there unless you are proved otherwise. This is a very drastic step which has been taken, and it has taken too long for them. And I don't think
And
the authorities are so incompetent that they were not able to get the connect in those
I mean,
10, 15 days.
I was just going to say that it's been what, 18 days now,
Yes,
18
yes,
days. And
yes.
before I come to Mr. Banerjee, Madhavan, there's now a growing perception, and I don't know if more people in the film industry will speak up today. We did see a few tweets from a few people expressing solidarity with Shahrukh Khan. The rest of the industry does remain quite distinctly silent. There is some perception that the messaging here is basically a cue to the film industry to remain quiet. That this is a kind of elaborate culture war. It started in 2020 with the Sushant Singh case, with a slew of actors who appeared before the NCB. Nothing really concrete came of that case, but who remembers that? You ensured that none of those actors who appeared before the NCB last year are going to be speaking on any socio-political issues. Madhavan, do you see it as that, or do you see this as a bit of a stretch here in seeing a kind of
No,
conspiracy to push actors into
it
silence?
it's not a stretch, Barkha, but I think let's take a look at the global context. If you look at the United States, Hollywood has always been at war with the right wing in Washington, D.C. It's a worldwide ideological conflict between a certain kind of what George Bernard Shaw would have called middle class morality and a certain liberal free thinking culture in which uh, soft drugs or something maybe one extreme, but the other is a certain bohemian lifestyle, the LGBT and all. So what under the
But that
Modi
has
government?
nothing to do with cocaine or heroin, right? I don't think we
Yeah,
should conflate
yeah, that's right. But
LGBTQ or personal sexual orientation or
yeah, yeah.
sexuality with drugs.
I,
I don't see the connection
no,
at
no,
all.
no, no. But yeah, I hear you. But what I'm trying to see here is a certain set piece morality of a certain what I would call authoritarian morality that dictates the behavior within the four walls of the constitution, but as much hardline and authoritarian as possible. And this is finding a very I agree with you to some extent. It is to knock the fear of God into the softer side of Bollywood to make sure there's nothing going wrong, and it is ably supported by a culture of what I call news voyeurism, in which there is a happy marriage of convenience between the NCB leaking out bits and pieces. Just take a deep breath and look at the visualization of this entire drama. A little boy, I mean, 23 years old, has been possessed, I mean, found in possession of drugs, even if that be true. The possibility of him being a drug dealer is low, and tampering of the evidence, which hasn't been mentioned so far in this panel, looks less probable, especially if you can keep him under house arrest. And there is already a body of evidence that the law enforcers claim they have. 20 days have passed almost. So therefore, if you put all these together, there is only some kind of a cultural policing intent that I see.
Mm-hmm.
Along with a certain, you can take an ideological view of it and say this represents a certain crackdown on the moral decadence of India, or you could simplify it down to the fact that they don't like free thinking Bollywood critique of their ideology. Either way, it the needle points to a lack of probability or plausibility in keeping a 23-year-old. He doesn't look. I mean, I'm not trying to defend him.
I mean, I was just going to
Point
say
is,
that you said a little boy.
what is the
You,
probability that Aryan Khan is a drug dealer, as distinct from a drug user?
well. Let me tell you this with respect to Mr. Banerjee, that actually data shows that the NCP in Mumbai has, 88% of their arrests have been consumers and not traffickers. So basically, the big sharks are getting away, and you get the users, but you don't actually get the dealers, the peddlers, or the traffickers. And I don't know how much of this has also become a prestige case. 93.3% with legal center tells us of drug arrests in 2020 were of consumers. So really, if this is to clean up the drug sort of supply routes in India, then I don't know if anyone is actually convinced that this is the way to really go about it. So let me take that question to Nikhil, and then I'll come to you, Mr. Banerjee, because we have a lot of questions for you. Nikhil, you wrote a moving piece on mental health and Aryan Khan, I think, for the Quint, if I'm not wrong. And, you spoke about thinking of what this 23-year-old might be going through. Now, there's been a lot of debate online over whether 23 is a little boy, which is what it looks like to people of mine and Madhavan's vintage. But there have been but there have been many soldiers in particular who have shared photographs of themselves at the age of 18, 19, 20 in uniform, having already seen, their first conflict, their first war when they were in their 20s, not liking this idea of Aryan Khan being presented as a poor little young rich boy. So it's a very polarizing discourse, Nikhil, and I'm wondering how you're seeing it, especially since you work with young people.
Yeah. Well, Barkha, I think it's a very fair point, that there are obviously 18-year-olds who are doing, who are in the middle of conflict and who are doing, probably saving lives during the pandemic as well. So many young doctors have done so much. But I feel like this young person for the fact that he is not one of them and he is rich, but he is privileged. We cannot also do that for the opposite reason, right? Why are we making an example out of him for being from privilege? Does he not deserve our empathy? Does he not deserve to have humanity? Does he deserve to be reduced to a news headline just because he happens to be of privilege? I don't see how that is fair, at all. So a lot of the discourse that happens, that is reducing him to memes, to WhatsApp forwards, being mean about the fact that he's Shahrukh Khan's son. But that seems like the only crime over here. That the crime is greater than the offense that he seems to have made. The offense at this point, which is still unproven, is that he might be a drug consumer. But the crime over here seems to be that he's Shahrukh Khan's son.
And the process, you mean that there's almost a kind of Schadenfreude, Nikhil, about the fact that he's a rich guy, an actor's son. He has a glamorous life, so let's pull him down. What's called the crab mentality of Indians.
It's what it's what I think Madhavan sir was also speaking about. Just a kind of voyeurism that we are seeing. We need to be entertained. And somehow for the last couple of years, the entertainment that we are getting, because we don't have theaters, because we don't have, subsequent enough avenues for entertainment, has become the lives of, people. And a lot of these lives of people who, for some reason, we believe are just because they happen to be working in Bollywood, just because they happen to be, in the industry that is so-called the glamour industry, is fair game. It's not. How can you, just because somebody is on screen and representing, a certain amount of, dreams and stories of others, certain amount of narratives, does not mean that we can reduce their stories for our entertainment. I find it quite tragic and quite upsetting. I've also been a part of Bollywood for very long. I mean, it almost seems like a very targeted way of pulling down an industry which for a very long time has been India's soft power. I mean, I've grown up outside in the Middle East. Barkha, I've come to India because I watched DDLJ and Kuch Kuch Hota and I wanted to work in this industry. I joined Yashraj films because, I'd seen DDLJ when I was a young person, and I believed that I also want to tell stories to an audience, to connect with people. That's the impact it had on me when I was growing up in Dubai and Bahrain. And I can imagine what Shahrukh Khan means to so many people in the country and in the world. I mean, I wrote today, he's the love language of India. And all we are hearing and seeing right now is a lot of hate.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I wrote a piece for the Washington Post where I said that Shahrukh Khan, once with his self-made stardom, his middle classness, his interfaith marriage, his embrace of multiculturalism, he stood for India. I remember once he said that I'm a representation of this country. So if he's the representation of this country, then what are we representing today? That is a question we must ask ourselves. But Mr. Banerjee, I would like to draw our audience's attention to the nuts and bolts of this investigation, to the fact that over the last year, the NCB seems to have, depending on your point of view, either been training its guns to clean up Bollywood or been going on a fishing expedition. Today, you've had Ananya Panday, another actor. Obviously, the cue came from the WhatsApp chats of Aryan Khan. Not just her residence raided, but she appeared before the NCB, and we have those pictures. This was very reminiscent of what happened last year when you had a slew of actors, whether it was Deepika Padukone or Sara Ali Khan, actually come before the NCB. But kuch hua to hai nahi, nothing came of that. Right. So, Mr. Banerjee, are you convinced about the way the NCB is conducting itself in this case, sir?
Actually, this case has received too much publicity. I fully sympathize with Shahrukh Khan. I know the agony, mental agony he is going through. But at the same time, I would say that this should not have happened. His son should not have experimented with drugs. Now, basically, narcotics, our job is to stop the proliferation of narcotic drugs. There are two ways of doing it. One is to reduce the supply, another is to reduce the demand. Now, by arresting these people, but the users and all that, for example, Shahrukh Khan or those who are using drugs, it is one way of reducing the demand. If you reduce the demand, the supply will automatically decrease. Now, as you have said or rightly said that 93% of the arrests have been made of consumers. Now, and the rest is actually those who are trafficking in the drugs. Now, these 7% who are trafficking in the drugs, they are supplying to the all of the consumers. So, of course, it is better to arrest the drug traffickers, the big drug traffickers. Then only we can reduce the demand.
But sir, do you think this has become a bit of a prestige case for the NCB? Because there are serious credibility issues that have arisen in the investigation by the presence of two men, and we have those pictures. One is KP Gosavi, a private investigator based out of Pune, who's actually on Facebook posing with a pistol. He's since gone absconding, and the other is Mr. Bhanushali, a BJP worker. Both of these men were present at the cruise ship raid, and subsequently end up taking selfies with Aryan Khan in custody, and even escort two of the accused by the arm. Now, this in itself, a former Director General of the NCB was saying is very bad for the image of the NCB and questions the credibility of the entire process. What do you say, sir?
I would say that basically the NCB has been mandated to catch hold of big smugglers, big drug traffickers. Of course, this is one way of reducing the demand. But at the same time, I would say that this case has received too much publicity. There are many people who have been arrested in similar cases, but it has not received any publicity. Just because he is Shahrukh's son, that's why this case has received so much publicity. Of course, it has gone too far. Now, if, as the NCB says, that he is involved in a conspiracy, then they'll have to prove it. It's not just they have arrested it or they feel.
Why do they need him? I'm coming to you, Madhavan, in a moment. But why do they need him in jail? What is this evidence that could be tampered with? Mrunalini said that evidence could be tampered with. The NCB today has gone to Mr. Khan's house. I mean, Shahrukh Khan's house. It's not given too many details. It says it went to collect some documents. Presumably, they searched the residence. Presumably, 18 to 20 days is enough of a time for the NCB to have got what they wanted to from Aryan Khan. Why are they opposing bail, Mr. Banerjee?
Well, as an investigator, I would say that I do not know much of it, and nobody knows much of it. You just cannot, investigation cannot be leaked out. The full portion of the important investigations cannot be leaked out. Otherwise, it will alert the people who may be implicated later. So we just cannot say what evidence the NCB has right now. Of
Okay.
course, they might have given some evidence to the special court and all that. That's why the special court, in its view, has continued to keep him in lockup, in custody. That's
Okay,
what I feel.
let's take that to Madhavan. Madhavan, every time that there's a suggestion from a certain section of, let's say, the media or the film industry, that this is a signaling by by the powers that be to the film industry, the answer given is this decision is the courts. The courts could have thrown out the case. But increasingly, we're seeing lower courts not feeling very enthusiastic about bail. It's almost as if they pass that decision or the responsibility of that decision onto higher courts. That's my first question. The second question is, the NCP could well turn around and say, we're just trying to clean up Bollywood. We're not trying to bully Bollywood. We're trying to clean it up, which is the narrative that you see in several of the television channels as well, and we know who we're talking about. Go ahead, Madhavan.
I think very clearly India is going through a phase of what you could call the super cop syndrome. You know, even Hollywood has its own, Rambo kind of culture. We have a super cop syndrome in which, if you see the history of this government, you see whether it's demonetization or the Balakot strike or whatever. I'm looking at it in a sense of what I call political culture as perceived and enforced, where the attempt is to see that law enforcement has to be as tough as possible, and the courts generally, I'm sorry to say this, they play along, because within the evidence based jurisprudence that we function in, what's called the Anglo Saxon jurisprudence, there is elbow room for both judges and law enforcers to crack the whip or play along. And that is being used. For instance, you cannot deny bail forever, but you can delay it. So that is being played out. But I have a serious question here, which is that how do you, between the judiciary, or rather between the first detention to the judiciary, how do you play this game? So this is where the voyeurism part of it becomes significant. And this is where the real question is of what are the ethics and procedures you have to
And,
follow.
and also in playing to this voyeurism, it is the perfect
Yeah,
distraction.
let
You know,
me
you don't
end.
have to. You don't. You can respond to that.
No,
You don't
let
have to
me
talk
let me
about petrol, the price of petrol, if you're going to talk about Shahrukh Khan,
yeah,
right?
the point is, yeah, that becomes whataboutery, which is both used by all concerned, because we are a
Yeah.
diverse country with lots of pressing issues. But whataboutery apart, there are serious issues of governance. For instance, let me take you back to Finance Minister VP Singh, who later became Prime Minister. During his tenure, there were income tax rates on prominent industrialists, and the government arrived at a code of conduct after much hollering that it shouldn't be publicized at randomly, and the PIB shouldn't be issuing press releases. If that were to be taken as a precedent in this case, the the voyeuristic raw material provided by the law enforcers, the NCB here, is tantamount to a violation of that kind of a thing. You have cutaways, you have the selfies are the ultimate, but even without selfies, the publicization of the rights, how do you ensure that cameras and TV reporters turn up there? So what we are seeing, Barkha, is a spectator sport at a new Wankhede stadium, and it is simply not cricket.
Yeah, I think spectator sport captures it quite well. Mrunalini, the point is exactly that the process is the punishment, right? That eventually, as we saw last year with the Riya Chakrabarti that spent a month in jail, that case is floundering. She was called a murderer by some of our television channels. The medical autopsy at the All India Medical Institute said that Sushant Singh Rajput committed suicide. We don't know what the status of that case is. Alongside that case, you had a Deepika Padukone, a Shraddha Kapoor, a Sara Ali Khan, all appearing before the NCB. Exactly this sort of voyeuristic, wall-to-wall coverage. Nobody even remembers what happens to all that. It was all drowned by the second wave of COVID. The point, though, is one, that the process is the punishment. Two, that it is ensured that those people to whom this happened are probably going to be very different people today. And maybe Madhavan would suggest, Nikhil would suggest that's the point. Mrinalini.
No, so I agree with you that the whole, if I may use the word tamasha, which happened in last year with Riya Chakravarti's matter, and we have no idea what is the end, to that. But coming back to a different question, I understand and I completely condemn the celebrity bashing that is going on, and I think media is equally responsible for the same, for highlighting this entire thing, because it could have been done in a discreet manner without even doing their own investigation, but not letting anybody know about it and who is arrested. Those who are close to the family may have found out. People like you and at least people like me who are not a part of the industry would not even know what is happening. So obviously, who is to be blamed about it? Is it the celebrity status of the party concerned, or is it also that the NCB or the authorities want to give it a lot of prominence, so that to give them the benefit of doubt, it serves as a deterrent? If you take an example, for example, in between, you must have seen there were some statements which were made by NCB that they are counseling Aryan Khan and trying to make him understand, or make him more socialist in his approach, and trying to understand what the entire situation is. I think there has to be a balance between the two. The Today it's an offense. Let's accept that. Today we have an act in place. Whether it's good, it's bad, it's ugly, it is unconstitutional, it has to be struck down, is a completely different issue. But if there is an act in place, and if having consuming drugs over a certain thing is considered to be an offense, okay, then what the authorities are doing is sticking to the letter of the law and not understanding the spirit of the law. However, we need to understand that this could be done in a better manner, and I repeat at the cost of repetition, custodial interrogation for the purposes of finding the root cause cannot go on so endlessly. It has to be curbed. It cannot be more than 3 days, 4 days, given max 1 week. Beyond that, you can't keep people because you've got to do some other jobs and people are languishing. But Barkha, can I tell you something? This we are talking about it because it is Mr. Khan's son who is there. There are so many cases that we see where criminals are languishing because there is no access, that they have to have bails. There is no access for any options that they have. We are not even talking about it. We are talking about this case because he's a celebrity's son.
I mean, I mean
And
that's
do
such
you
a
know,
good point.
I'll just take 60 seconds more. It is the Chief Justice of India, Mr. Ramana, in one of his the discussions that he had said that today and he is an activist. He has been an activist and who believes in giving freedom of sort of movement, etc. Who has said that we need to deal with these issues where the
Mrunalini, the case seems to go all the way up to the Supreme Court before bail is given. Look at Munawar Faruqi, who
yes,
was in jail for a joke he didn't crack until it went to a higher court. There was no justice, and that's in fact the point. Let me just come in here and also take this to Nikhil. Nikhil, as someone who said you came to India, you moved to India because you were so shaped by DDLJ and sort of the love language, as you called it, of Shahrukh Khan. There's been a lot of debate over his industry, your erstwhile industry, or maybe even your present industry, just being silent, right? And Shahrukh himself, in the same piece that I write, I say that the last time I remember him speaking was when he turned 50. It was 2015. We're in 2021. That's the last time he took a position on anything that he felt strongly about. What are the questions? I'm not saying I believe this, but a lot of people say, should you be standing up for people who don't stand up for either themselves or for any other issue or for anything else? How do you respond to that?
It's a fair question. I've asked this question myself. I've asked this publicly. Why are not enough people from Bollywood kind of speaking up about whatever goes on in our country? But I also understand that it's one of those things where you get trolled if you do it, you get trolled if you don't. And trolling, I mean, we've seen cases, Barkha, of Sanjay Leela Bhansali getting beaten up on a set. We've seen Deepika Padukone having a bounty put on her head. When you have conversations, I mean, Hansal Mehta back in the day had like black inks thrown on his face. Anybody who even takes stances, it's not easy to take stances in our country. They were Anurag Kashyap has faced so much. Riya Chakravarti last year has faced so much. Now we are seeing Shahrukh Khan face all of this. Anybody who takes a stance, there are repercussions.
But I'm saying that is true. For all of us in all fields, we're all trolled, Nikhil. I'm trolled every single day. Like, I don't stop being myself.
No, but
And
Barkha,
I
that's
don't
also
have,
not
and I don't have
fair.
the money, the battery of lawyers, the influence, and also indeed the following and the popularity that these stars you've named too.
See, it's again, I'm not defending them. At any point of time, I'm not saying that they should not be speaking up. In fact, I think that this is another example where they need to realize that not speaking up is not going to spare you either. You will still be, and more than anything else, again, as you said, there's a cultural war going on over here. Which seems to target a certain kind of industry. It's not that an engineering college in our country is not using or consuming drugs, but anybody in Bollywood is doing, and this is not condoning drugs. And no way am I saying drugs are okay. But what are we really doing about the public health issue over here? Where are the policies that are happening at a medical, at a level of health? Where is the public policy on that? What are we doing about drug addiction in different parts of the country? But there are no policies to find there. There are no cases. There are no news headlines about the fact that okay, we have put this policy and we are going to make sure that in places like Punjab, where there is, I read somewhere in statistic, there's 1 in 10 people every single day in a country who are dying because of drug addiction. And if that is the case, these are the crazy statistics. What are we really doing about that? Why are we targeting this, micro influencers just to kind of make a point and deter people?
Yeah,
Only thing this is
I
deterring people is this. The only thing that I feel like this is deterring people from is the fact that is a certain kind of, I think, a normalization in an Indian cultural context of a young person making some sort of a mistake. If somebody, the public shaming that we are seeing over here, that we seem as a culture to normalize that anybody, and especially a young person, does something wrong, whatever that level of offense is, it's fair game.
yeah.
All of us can join together and shame that person in our family WhatsApp groups as well.
Madhavan also said both Mrunalini and Madhavan have hands up. So I'll go to Mrunali first, and then Madhavan, and then Mr. Banerjee. But I think, as Madhavan said, it's the new Wankhede Stadium, and it's just not cricket. There is something gladiatorial about it. There is something baying for blood at the city town square feel about it. Mrunalini, go ahead.
I just have one point to make. I think we should now also look at the issue is the drug menace. I think today we are talking about Aryan Khan, and I completely understand that this celebrity bashing, keeping him in jail for 18, 20 days, and whatever the things that are not acceptable, are not done, and obviously. But I think we should also look at the drug menace that is there. And if the authorities, and giving them the benefit of doubt that they are really trying to get to it, then is it not something that needs to be tackled with? Surely not the manner that they are doing it right now. Pick up a celebrity son and make that as a brand ambassador for their
Yeah.
project of getting this. That I'm completely against it. You can't ruin somebody's life, and you can't use a celebrity status to forward your agenda. But at the same time, we are not talking in this discussion as to how and why and whether we should be dealing
Okay,
with
let's talk about that. Let's talk
Yes,
about that. I
that's
think
not,
that's an
and
important.
I
I
think
think, yeah.
I think you have two people who, the gentleman here who was in the narcotics, and he would tell us that what is the reason and how can we deal with it? Because it's not only about the celebrities having drugs. There are even drugs being had by people who resort to middle class, lower middle class people. Then they resort to theft, resort to so many other things. So we need to deal with the main issue over
So,
here, which is
so
equally important, which is the drug menace.
No, I agree. And I think that we must all say that when we sort of question the disproportionate, or what we think to be the disproportionate response of the law, that is, does not equal us saying, hey, please go and do drugs. Quite the opposite. I think, Mr. Banerjee, the point is simply is this stopping people from doing drugs, right? It is that old debate. If you have the death penalty, does it actually deter crime? Intuitively you think yes, the statistics prove otherwise. So if you go around rounding up users but never get to the peddlers, never get to the dealers. So for example, one would have thought, just to give an example, that after what happened with Deepika and Sara Ali Khan and Shraddha Kapoor being summoned by the NCB, you would not have had people on their WhatsApp talking about drug use, as is alleged that Aryan Khan did. But he still did it, according to the NCB. I don't know if he did it or not. That's the charge. Mr. Banerjee,
I
the
would suggest
point
that
being, yeah, the point here is, are we really trying to stop the use of drugs and the sale of drugs and the trade of drugs, or are we just wanting to gloat over a 23-year-old man's shame?
I would say that Section 27, which deals with the addicts, consumers of drugs. This should be amended. First time offenders who are using drug just for enjoyment, they should not be arrested. They should be sent for de-addiction. And if they commit a second offense, then only should they be arrested and punished. Because the law is too harsh. As I said, I'm always in favor of amendment to this particular section, because young people tend to experiment with drugs. Initially, when we were young, we used to experiment with drinks and all, alcoholic drinks. But now people tend to experiment with hard drugs. Now, if they are arrested for consuming hard drugs and all that, first or second time, then the entire career will be spoiled. They'll not be getting any jobs. Society will shun them. There'll be a problem for them in every sphere. So this particular section 27 should be amended.
Yeah, that's a very, I think, a progressive perspective that we've heard from a former narcotics official. Madhavan, to you, I do have to close. The last word to you. There are things that we have to unpack here. There's a culture wars around the film industry. Sorry, Nikhil has 1 point, so I'll let Nikhil come in and give you the last word, Madhavan, if that's okay with you. Nikhil, go ahead.
I just want to I think there is an idea of using Bollywood as an example study for all the bad things that seem to be prevalent in our society, including a drug menace. Which is, and if at all, the authorities in question would actually use the help of Bollywood to spread this public messaging about the addiction, to spread this public messaging about the harmful effects of drug, that is probably going to have a far greater impact than taking out 2 or 3 people and making an example out of that. As I said, that there is a larger public health issue, what Mrunalini was also talking about, a drug menace out there that we definitely need to be talking about. But whenever you need selfies, whenever you need to kind of show off to the world that we have soft power in Bollywood, whenever you need a larger message to be put out, you reach out to Bollywood. But at this point of time, if you're going to reduce Bollywood to be seen as as a drug menace industry, how are you going to use it to better and positive effects later on? When tomorrow you want to tackle tobacco, tomorrow you want to have a conversation around pads, who will ever look at a Bollywood celebrity and say, okay, why is this person telling me this?
I think that's a great point. So I'll give Madhavan the last word. And I was just going to say there's a lot to unpack here. There's the law. There's the perception, Madhavan, there's the perception of the entitled Bollywood brat pack. But there's also what Nikhil says. There's so much about India that is contained in the film industry, whether it is, just self-madeness. For every nepotist example, there is a self-made boy like Shahrukh Khan who came from Delhi and made it big. There is sort of pluralism. There is multiculturalism. There's so much there.
Hold it. There is much more than that, Barkha. Let me take you back to V. Shantaram's Do Aankhe Bara Haath. There have been reformist movies have been a central part of Bollywood. Jis Desh Mein Ganga Behti Hai is believed by research to have led to the surrender of dacoits. Bollywood led to an impact. And last but not the least, we've had a wonderful movie on the drugs menace in Punjab called Utta Punjab, made by one of Bollywood's most talented filmmakers, Abhishek Chaubey. So Bollywood always takes issues head on and tries to examine it, but there is a certain bohemian quality to free thinking that can sometimes create some problems, but democracy allows for that.
Some would say you're romanticizing drug use when you call it bohemian.
No, I'm looking at both sides, Barkha. Bohemian is the private life of some individuals in Bollywood, whereas apart from entertainment and the self-made bit that you spoke about, there is also a serious side to Bollywood. Whether you take today's filmmakers like Anubhav Sinha or actors like Taapsee Pannu or Richa Chadha, there is a progressive Bollywood out there which is wonderfully mixing the old-fashioned parallel cinema with the commercial one. I can talk to you for hours on that. And my late friend Anil Sari, who coined the term sixth estate for Bollywood, fifth estate is cricket, shows that Bollywood is an institution. And therefore, that institutional quality has to be mentioned. Last but not the least, Aryan Khan is a young man. There are people who call him a boy, and the critics say even Bhagat Singh was martyred at the age of 23. I agree with the critics. But the Supreme Court has said there is a right to privacy also. So is an independent young man who's 23 years old entitled to privacy and not being reduced to a dynastic son? That's a question we need to ask going forward. And of course, fame is a funny animal. You've been through this, Barkha.
Yeah.
It can attract unwanted attention, and you have to be a bit responsible whether you like it or not. But that is an ethical issue and a practical issue. But as a law-abiding culture that respects diversity and freedom of thought, we need to enforce the law in a way that is socially acceptable within the Constitution's four corners, and that seems to be lacking in this case.
Well, we will have to end there. The other thing about the process being the punishment, and Mrunalini, as a lawyer, you guys are used to this. But for the person in jail, every time there's a bunch of holidays, the court just sets that tariq pe tariq syndrome. And I do want to end with, I think the point has been made by all four panelists. We're talking about Aryan Khan because he's the son of a famous father. But the data tells you, one, of course, the plight of under trials in general, but all government data tells you that Muslims, Dalits, and tribals are in jail in disproportionate numbers to their population numbers. Please, there is no getting away from the sort of collision of caste and class and community when we talk about who's in jail and for how long. So please let us remember that the focus on Aryan Khan, let it at least lead to, as Mr. Chatterjee said, Mr. Banerjee said, I beg your pardon, a conversation about amending the law, but also taking a closer look at the state of under trials in our country. Leaving it there. We'll see you next week. This case isn't going away anywhere. Thank you for joining us. And to our audience, we'll see you tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.